What's up, guys? This is Carter Thomas with Coin Mastery TV. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you're returning. Welcome back. We are talking about potential bull reversals, bear reversals, reversals in general, potential. We're talking about a little bit about margin shorts. We're going to talk a lot about market cap, liquidity, altcoins, Bittrex making moves, and overall ecosystem domination. Some interesting times we are living in. And so what I want to do today is give you guys a few things that I've been really focusing on, thinking about as it relates to this kind of moment in time, where it sits. I think that it is such a perfect split of people that are bullish, people that are bearish. And then there's obviously the people that are just kind of like, well, what's going to happen next? And I would say I really fall in that camp. I do not have conviction one way or another at this point. I just don't think that it's realistic to think that anyone can predict what's going to happen in the future. But what we can do is look at all the things that may be driving this particular moment in time. And with that, you can prepare for either one of those options. That's really the game. That's the end game of this. That's the strategy. That's really what I'm doing as it stands. So I'm on the 4 hour looking at Bitcoin. Again, we're focusing mostly on Bitcoin and Ethereum, really because that's just where all the action is. And then we're going to talk about altcoins, a couple of strategies around altcoins in a minute here. But I think that we're seeing this up and down pattern. And one thing to notice that if you don't know much about charts and technical analysis, that's fine. And I'm not going to get too crazy on these. These are not perfect drawings by any means, but I am drawing a triangle right on the bottom here. So if you zoom out, you can see it's a very small piece of the triangle. For anybody listening, this triangle is really showing the last 2 weeks, really of all of April, and how it went up, down, up, and it bounced off this top line and it's coming back down. So there's this thing in charts called fractals. Some people believe in fractals, some people don't believe, or I should say, some people use fractals as a charting method, some people do not. What fractals mean is that there are patterns that repeat on small scales that can also be repeating on large scales. And so it can go both ways and go, there's a small version of it, then there's a big version of it, right? When you look at the 2013 Bitcoin bubble, that's a small version of the 2017 Bitcoin bubble. That's considered a fractal. Similarly speaking, when you look at the 4 hour on this right here, this triangle, and then you zoom out, you can see that it's potentially a small version of this whole huge triangle happening. And you could start to see these patterns playing out in many different ways. And these fractals tend to be specific to the individual asset class. So in this case, Bitcoin. So you couldn't necessarily do a fractal here and then compare it to like oil or something. I mean, loosely speaking. But it is something that a lot of people are looking at, and you are seeing these play out kind of over and over. So if you're ever wondering what's going to happen on the big picture, often you look at the big picture playing out on smaller scales. That can give you clues on what may happen next. And there's a lot, that's a whole different rabbit hole, which we can discuss at some other point. But I think that that's one really interesting piece of the puzzle is if you look at, imagine this was the big Bitcoin run, we can watch what happens here on a kind of small scale and get a very, very loose data point on what may happen on the big scale. So I think that's just something that I've been checking out. It's definitely not an exact science, but it is an interesting piece of the puzzle. Now, we're looking at this longer term trend line. It's not the full long-term trend line because this is not Bitstamp, which has back to 2011 data, really the original data. This is just back to 2015 for Bitfinex, or this line at least. And we're bouncing right off of it, non-log, and we're showing signs of consolidation. Hopefully accumulation, which would then catapult us through this downward trend line and into the promised land, the parabolic world. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind. The first is that if you look at the volume, we've been talking about volume. The volume is not necessarily what we would hope it would be, especially for an accumulation phase, right? If this was a true accumulation phase, we would have seen a pretty severe drop off in volume. Maybe this would be a little bit more contracted, and then you would see a very pretty gradual die down, and then you'd see a huge ramping of price. And maybe we'll see that coming up. But to me, like the volume here just isn't, it doesn't look the same way that you would see in a typical accumulation pattern. I would want, in a true kind of perfect world, I shouldn't say perfect world because it's not what I want to happen, but in a perfect chart world, I guess, this would extend out for a lot longer and it would get really smooth. The volume would get really, really low. You'd see a few big accumulation pumps that would kind of spark the longer term move, and it would get the flywheel going. And if we do see a pump right here, to me, it's going to be probably not that long lived. So I actually do think that we are in a position where this may move up. I still think this 7,800, 8,000 area is a big deal. But if that happens, I don't know if that's just going to sustain it. I don't know if there's enough horsepower to blast us through the resistance that's required. Another interesting thing to check out, if you go to indicators and go to volume profile, I'm going to go to visible range here. If you're on TradingView, you can see this. Now let's scroll out. So I'm on 4 hour, basically zoom out as far as you can. I'm going to drop myself down here, and let's go basically to, starting with kind of the last, like middle of September, which was kind of the last big dip in the fall. If you go over here on the sides, move myself out of the way so you guys can see. What this on the right side is, for anybody listening, is it's colored bars that are horizontal. And what this does is this shows you how much volume is associated with every price level. And what you see, especially if you zoom in here, as you get even, let's get into this full bear market here. So now the visible range, you can see over here, basically the peak of Bitcoin right at the middle of December down to the present moment. By far, the top volume level is between like 8,300 and 8,700. So the most volume is happening there. If you scroll in even further, more into this bear trend, you can see that holds its own. What this means is that there is the most volume was at this level, meaning this is going to be a very, very, very strong resistance point, right? If there's this much volume on the way down, there's going to be probably the same amount of volume on the way up, and it's very hard to break through that. So that is why I think that this, anywhere from 7,800, I guess, up to 8,300, this whole area is going to prove to be very, very difficult to break through. And if we move me back down here, we take that off, we go over and we switch this to log, right? Now, when you look at the downward line on the log scale, you realize that there's a lot more runway, and that gives us the ability to have a bull run up to that area where there was a lot of volume resistance. So this whole space, there could be some blue sky from here up to there, but I think that's, to me, remember we talked yesterday or the other day about how waiting for really like serious confirmation before you start buying back in. I may play in this area, just kind of short-term trading, 10, 15, 20% rips. But until I start getting serious about getting back in, I want to see the price go through that, come back down, bounce off of it as a support level to prove that it really broke through sufficiently, and then start going up. So that's what I'm seeing. That's my game plan for now. In the meantime, though, I do think that there's a big opportunity in this area, right? I think that we've been talking about this week. I think that there's a lot of bullish signs. I think that there's a lot of people a lot of sentiment that's bullish right now, which is interesting. The other piece of the puzzle is if you look on the daily, you can see how many shorts are being laid out on Bitfinex by the day. And yesterday, or I guess even today, we are at all-time high short positions on Bitfinex. And you can, loosely extrapolate that if it's this high on Bitfinex, it's this high on everything. It's this high on Bitfinex, Kraken, Poloniex, BitMEX, all the shorting platforms. And this is a big deal. If there's this many shorts, that means that there's an enormous amount of shorting pressure on this price right now. What that also means is that if someone liquidates those shorts, a lot of them either get liquidated or they start to close. That relieves a lot of the downward pressure, meaning that this consolidation pattern could easily spike up very, very quickly before these shorts get fulfilled, or whatever you want to call it. Typically, whenever you see a huge amount of shorts like this, someone's going to come in and liquidate them pretty aggressively, because it's easy money if you have deep pockets, so to speak. So a lot of different factors going into play. Again, I think that just based on pure sentiment, pending no bad news, I think that there's going to be an opportunity to take some very calculated, very risk-averse trading in the coming weeks. But I'm not convinced that we are going to blast out of this 78 to 8,500 range yet. I don't see it quite yet. I think that liquidity is still an issue. Now, the other story, as we've been talking about, is Ethereum. Ethereum has been showing a lot of really good signs on support. And this is the kind of stuff you like to see, these spikes in volume, where this one was obviously a huge spike up, a huge spike down, and then a very quick retrace, right? This is not only built, this is because of margin trading, but also because of just major amount of pent up demand, people who are getting excited about this level again. So there's a lot of support around here. And what you're finding, or what I'm seeing, Ethereum, you always have like Ethereum, Litecoin, Bitcoin, right? The three majors that are all really the ones that are leading the pack, not only from market cap, but just from liquidity, from a fiat standpoint. And typically on any given day, one of those is kind of the leader. So some days it's Bitcoin, and then Ethereum and Litecoin will follow Bitcoin's lead. Other days it might be Litecoin. Sometimes it might be Ethereum. Last couple of days, it's definitely been Ethereum. So this is a good sign, is that it's showing these bull signals, which means that it could easily translate over into both Bitcoin and Litecoin. So we're just going to keep an eye on that the same way we're keeping an eye on Bitcoin. It really depends on what your pick your poison type of situation. I heard a great quote. What was it? Nassim Taleb in his new book, Skin in the Game. Highly recommended, by the way. He quotes, I think it's a famous quote or a parable. It talks about poison comes in golden cups. I thought that was just such a good quote. I love it. Let's look at CoinMarketCap for a second. Now, the big thing on CoinMarketCap, two things before we get into the altcoins. The first, Bitcoin dominance keeps coming down. Now, that is one because of Ethereum showing some strength while Bitcoin's still bouncing around, mostly because, in my opinion, because of margin trading and the lack of liquidity. Second is because a lot of juice is going back into altcoins. Bittrex, which we'll talk about, they're leading the charge on that. But here's something that I really wanted to show you guys that I think is a super, it's something that I definitely look at. These are the kind of things that I look at all the time. We're scrolling down to the total market cap excluding Bitcoin, so essentially the altcoin. And you can see that, nothing new here, kind of the same curve. But in Photoshop, I did this. I want you guys to see this. If you're listening on the podcast, this is the same chart. I just drew a line to show you a support and resistance level. Now, we are currently at this support level. You can see that it's not exactly, but it's pretty close where we are. It's kind of bouncing around it, similar to how the price is bouncing around it. And when you go back and you look at when this market cap, excluding Bitcoin, was at this level previously, it was on November 29th. Now, this is the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, which, if you remember, that was really the beginning of the huge monster alt run of, December, January early January was just like banana town, right? Banana town? What the heck does that mean? But you know what I'm saying. Here's why this is an interesting data point, in my opinion. Last time it was 100 and today it's like 150. So it's close, right? Was right after Thanksgiving. It went all the way up and it came all the way back down. Meaning all the money that has been lost from the altcoin market is only the money that entered from end of November until now. So if you were here all of last year and you remember how much euphoria and how much excitement and how much juice was happening all the way up to November 29th, we are still at that level, just on the other side. And this is one of those weird kind of gray sciences where you just kind of have to put yourself in the shoes and go back and try to remember what it felt like early December. But that is the same size as the market is right now. And all these people are like, oh, it's a bear market, it's the end of days, blah, blah. But realize that the exact same size market was like, this is going to be huge, just a few months ago. And the reason why I think that this is really important is to give a little perspective when you're looking at the overall market in terms of where we are. Is this truly the bottom or not? I don't know. I think some people would say yes. I think that I'm obviously skeptical, and I'm not trying to predict it either way. I'm just trying to make a plan either way. But I think that, let's pull this back up. That's just a really important piece. If you're trying to be like, is this the bottom? Should I go back in? Should I start buying a Bitcoin or whatever? I don't know. I think completely objectively, I do not think that the euphoria that was at the end of November is indicative of what a bottom should feel like the size of the market and the types of people that were in it. It also makes you realize that the people that have been wrecked and have gotten out of crypto are only the people or all the money that came in after that point. Meaning everybody that got in the summer or even in the spring or even in early 2017 have not really felt any pain yet. I shouldn't say it. Like, obviously they felt pain, but they're not like screwed yet. They're still like, oh, well, I lost my profits and I'm still hurting, but I'm still up, or I'm still kind of like, I just broke even. And to me, when I look back at markets, when I read about history, when I look at bubbles and stuff like that, you can't be selective on who feels the pain. So I don't know. I think that's just something I've been thinking about. I've been running just so many different models, so many different pieces of data. That's just one that I thought was super fascinating. Just something that's worth remembering. Let's refresh this, get the most up-to-date data. Switch it over to BTC. We can see which is doing well. EOS is obviously taken off. It's interesting. Bitfinex just did some scheduled maintenance, right? They're kind of consistently under the scrutiny. They are also they seem to be doing a lot with EOS. They're doing like EOS Finex, which is an exchange powered by EOS, and EOS is really an interesting case study. Same with Neo in a lot of ways, where I've talked about this before. They bring in ICOs or companies into their ecosystem and provide funding as long as the coin builds it on EOS. And that's not good or bad. It's just that's one of the ways that their business model works. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics that happen with EOS in terms of centralization of power. It's different from centralization of the network. I'm just saying that the people that run EOS run a lot of stuff in the EOS network and community. And typically when there's a lot of centralization, a lot of power, the rest is history. So something to think about, and that can be both good for price. It can also be very fragile for price. But something to keep in mind as you make your decisions. Now, like I mentioned yesterday, I think communities are really, kind of looking at the coins that have the people that are most obsessed with the coin, for lack of a better term. But I do think, based on what's going on with Ethereum, what's going on with Bitcoin, if we do continue this bullish momentum, which it seems like we will for a lot of reasons, especially because so many people are bearish on the margin side, all we really need is one big liquidation and we could be in business. I think it's a good idea, and obviously none of this professional advice, entertainment purposes only, XYZ, the whole disclaimer thing. I think it's a good idea to start looking through some of these coins, looking at what a setup would look like, what a good price would look like, which coins have the biggest communities, which coins actually have some semblance of, they really do something that you could explain this to somebody who's not in crypto and they would kind of believe that it's got some sort of value. I think that you go down the list and start looking at that, and then you can get into, even if you're not technical, you can look at I don't even know what a good example would be. Let's look at salt. Actually, a bunch of people have been talking about salt recently, so I'll pull that up. You can start to look at the charts, right? Where, okay, obviously salt had a very, very high one, and now it's way down low, and you can start to see it's making a little bit of a move. So then you could look at salt and say, okay, let's go look at the Reddit channel. Let's look at the Telegram channel. Let's look at Bitcoin Talk. Let's look at Facebook, Twitter. Are the people who own salt, are they obsessed with salt? Does it solve a real problem? Do people outside of the crypto community like salt? Does this chart look like it is ready to go? And you can start to make pretty educated bets where you may not be holding on to this long term. Okay, I'm buying salt and I'll see it in 10 years. It may be more like, I'm buying it, I'm going to set a stop loss below it, and I'm going to try to make 10, 20% off of that trade or whatever it may be. I think that is probably the best way to approach this particular market at this particular moment on Wednesday. I mean, tomorrow it could be completely different, but that's the way that I would be looking at this. That is the way I will be looking at things like altcoins until I have information that changes my mind. Now, on top of that, Bittrex did two things. Redesign their site, which, whatever. I mean, cool. Dark instead of light. I mean, maybe they have a dark theme. I don't know. They also opened up user registration for about 5 hours, and then they shut it down because there's so many people. So that's a good sign. Very bullish that there's that many people that still want to sign up for Bittrex. This is also another very bullish sign because the more people that come into it, the more potential liquidity there is, the more market cap will go up, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy as it relates to this market, which is, let's be honest, it's a complete speculative market. And in speculation, liquidity is really what matters, right? The ability to buy and sell coins. It's a huge piece of the puzzle. So this is a great thing. I think the next big move that is going to happen on Bittrex is around that stablecoin idea. Obviously, they're still using Tether, but they have, TrueCoin, which we talked a little bit about. They're using this now. I wouldn't be surprised if TrueCoin got implemented. They keep delisting things. And then the holy grail for Bittrex is going to be if and when they get fiat pairings. That would be a very, very big deal. These guys are based out of Seattle, I believe. So it's a US-based company. So they have compliance issues, or I should say compliance considerations. But it's good to see these guys making moves. It's also good to see a U.S. exchange doing it. Not because I'm biased about the U.S. I'm just saying that because we need a U.S. fiat altcoin exchange the same way Binance is going to Malta and doing fiat. Because if for any reason the U.S. decides that they want to only allow U.S. exchanges for securities laws, this still saves the altcoin market, or at least part of it. So it's good. This is very good news, very bullish news, especially for the whole ecosystem, and then hopefully for the actual liquidity of many of these coins themselves. Now, last thing, there's an article. There's multiple articles. I think it was Bank of America that came out with this originally, but the title says Media Hype Falsely Reports Bitcoin as the Greatest Bubble in History. And so Bank of America tracked greatest bubbles in histories, and they came out and they were like, hey, it's crashing, it's falling apart, and it's it's going to go down to zero or whatever. And I think that, right, we've talked to death about media, what their true intent is. I mean, the media business, the news business, is a business built on how do you get eyeballs and clicks. It's not built on, the truth or what kind of journalism was originally built on. And that's a different discussion. But so you got to take it all with a grain of salt. But I think one piece, which I alluded to yesterday, is the idea of what creates a bubble. This is an idea that I've been thinking about for a long time, but the idea of valuation that goes against any sort of traditional valuation, that is truly what creates a bubble on the fundamental level. And crypto, the fact that you can't value it is what allows it to go through the roof, because there's no way to say it's not worth that. It's a whole new thing, it's a whole new paradigm. And so while people say that it's going to come down to zero, I think that the difference is that there's a lot of energy, and there's a lot of ways for this valuation to happen in a very realistic way that the market can decide on, as well as the general population and business or whoever, investors, whoever it may be, that everyone could agree upon it's worth this or whatever, and it's valued the same way as others. And I think that that's a little different. It's very different, I should say, than a lot of these other ones where the potential of tulips, you couldn't make a 100x argument that tulips are going to be worth 100 times more in 10 years than they are right now. Not going to happen. Same with all these other ones. Gold to a certain extent, but that was much more about federal policy. It was about kind of geopolitical dynamics and shifting of the guard type of thing, as opposed and not about like mining and supply and demand situations and utility of gold within jewelry and electronics and things like that. In the 1929 crash, if you don't know much about that, you should definitely go check it out, how the roaring 20s really drove ridiculous valuations, which is what culminated in the crash, right? Companies and stocks that were valued in ways that had never been valued before, that's what drove it. So while Bitcoin obviously did have a huge peak and it did come down, I think that it's different in the sense that there actually is something here. Some people wouldn't agree with me on that, but I think that Bitcoin in particular has some inherent value that the market will find, and that the fact that there's only 21 million of them, and the fact that there's a viable technological benefit of having a scarce, censorship-resistant store value, whatever it may be, that will gain value. That will be something that can be agreed upon as time continues. So I think that it's just, there's so much FUD about this, about comparing bubbles. And it's not that this isn't, it's a bubble or not a bubble. I think the question is, does it come back? And I think that the time will tell, but I think that this has a very different profile than all of these other assets, right? Because, the 29 stock market crashed, but then guess what? Came back like crazy 10, 15 years later, in part to, government spending and everything else. But something to keep in mind. I think along these lines, the last thing I'll say is that I think in the next 2 weeks, maybe even less than that, maybe the next week, we are going to see a lot of news come out about, like we're seeing with Galaxy Digital, with Novogratz. We're seeing it with, Venrock, Rockefeller companies, with Soros. They haven't really released any statements yet, but you're going to start to see a lot of institutional money that comes out and says what they're planning to do, what they have been doing, how they're approaching crypto, the potential they see in crypto. All I will say is this, and I do not know anything. I don't have any information that I'm that I'm withholding or whatever. There's no way, in my opinion, that any investment company, trading company, whoever, is going to go into the public sphere and say, here's what we're doing, here's what we believe is the future, and here's the path that we're going to take in a speculative market that does not require any sort of checks and balances, loosely speaking, and like there's no earnings reports and things that they got to back up their statements with. It is a game. They are here to win. And the idea of them coming out and be like, all right, here's our Bitcoin plan. Feel free to join us for this amazing ride. Like this is going to be so much, give me a break, right? So I don't know. I'm skeptical of anything I read. It's like the thing we talked about, don't trust, verify, prove it. Like, let's see what they do. Let's see what actually happens. Let's see them show the money let's see the actual purchases or the lack of purchases or the trading that they do. I want to see the actions. I don't want to hear what the vision is, what the words are. Show me get your skin in the game, as the book says. So keep an eye out for that. Remember, this is when people start to say certain things and they do other things. Case in point, shorts, price, the whole thing. Watch what people do. Don't listen to what they say when it comes to finance, behavior, predicting the future. All right? Exciting time, guys. I think we got some good stuff ahead. I think we've got some movement ahead. Very excited about it. In the meantime, I will catch you tomorrow. Hope you have a great day. Peace out.